Welcome to the first Procreative Podcast live ever at UMS 2019. My name is MARZ. I'm the host of Procreative, a parenting podcast based in Denver. And just want to quickly thank Denver Arts and Venues for their Imagine 2020 grant that has helped fund this project, this first live podcast for Procreative. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce my guest today. I'm joined by Greta Cornett, Bohemian Foundation, Kate Perdoni with Spirits and Rocky Mountain PBS, Eric Hallborg with Dragon Deer, and Joshua Trinidad with a variety of bands, including his own Joshua Trinidad Trio. So today we're here to talk about what it's like to be an artist, a musician, and also have children. So I'm gonna let you guys kind of introduce yourselves, kind of what your parenting situation is, what you're working on, and see where we go from there. Greta.
Sure. So my name's Greta Cornett, and I'm a trumpet player in a couple local bands up in Fort Collins. I met my husband through the music scene, so he's also a musician. He actually played last night here, so it was fun. And we have two kids. We have a 6-year-old and we have a 2-year-old. So we're currently going through the potty training phase. It's a little challenging. He's a boy.
I'm Kate Perdoni. Play in a rock band and an ambient duo, sometimes trio, sometimes quad scenario. I'm a television producer with Rocky Mountain PBS. I have an 8-year-old Leo who's hanging out back there. And I live in Colorado Springs with Leo. His dad and I split up when he was 4-ish, so single parenting.
Hi, I'm Eric Hallborg from Dragon Deer. I have a son, Jude, that's 10, playing pinball around the corner right now.
I can hear it.
Eve is 8. We live in Denver.
I'm Joshua Trinidad, and I have 2 kids. One is 2. She's going to be 3. Her name's Ciora. And I have an 11-year-old son. His name is Joey. And Ciora is taking a nap right now. She actually was just taken to my parents' house for a nap for the night, or for the day. So that's me.
Cool. Well, thank you guys all for being here. So I want to talk first about, what you're working on and just how your creative process has evolved. When you don't have kids, there's time kind of expands infinitely out, except for work or whatever you have. But I personally find myself now, I have to kind of fit, any time to write music or mix or do whatever into an hour block or whatever it is. And in a lot of ways, I kind of resisted that at first, but personally find it very helpful. So yeah, I'd like to hear kind of how your creative process has changed.
So I seem to always say that I'm like 10 years sleep deprived since Jude came. And I've found that I can sort of sleep in the gaps. I'm usually a night owl, but then I also have to wake up at 7 a.m. or whatever it happens to be to have the kids going. So I'm functioning, not all the time, but a lot of times I'm 4 hours of sleep, or I'll be like, oops, I didn't sleep tonight. And then I will, maybe get them off to school and then be sleeping in the gaps. And it's sort of similar to the creative times where it's just you fit it in wherever you can. I'm playing harmonica in the car, or bringing, I have this little travel electric guitar that I have in the car all the time, and it's drop them off at karate, and I'm sitting in the car with the AC on, kind of running scales or whatever. So it's just sort of unorthodox times to be creating and fitting it in, and it seems to work.
Yeah, I can attest to the unorthodox times to create. When Leo was a baby, his dad and I were recording our first album, and we could only pretty much record when he was sleeping. So sometimes I would be for 5 minutes, and sometimes I would be for 5 hours. And we would cram as much as we possibly could into those minutes, and every minute was precious. And so now that Leo's older and can kind of fend for himself, I think I'm like one of the most efficient people on earth, as all parents probably are. My productivity and the quickness and swiftness with which I get things done at this point in my life are like off the charts. So I can thank Leo for making me much more bionic human.
He has headphones on. He can't hear you.
Typical.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that. I think, the moment I had kids, I realized that my creative time, obviously it was less, but each minute mattered so much more, that in the past that I could just kind of be loosey-goosey with my time, and rehearsals could be unproductive and could turn into like a night of drinking or whatever. But now that I have a family, when I go to rehearsals, it's like this 1 hour means so much, and this is all I got, so we got to make it count. And so same with practicing at home and with my bands, that I try to schedule it when my kids are napping or they're some kind of function, so that when we have time to be as a family, that I'm there. So I think that that's most important. And then with practicing, it's actually my wife. She's like 70 to 80% of the success of me being able to do what I do. And she's a lawyer, and I'm also an assistant principal at a school, so we're super busy. And she just finished law school, and I finished my doctorate, and time is so important. So I would really say like every minute that we have has to be valuable. And so I feel like I've been more productive because of having kids, to be quite honest. It's been more focused.
Right. What about you, Greta?
Well, I can attest to everything y'all have said. Definitely, once we had kids, we became really organized, especially for musicians, because with both of us being musicians, it was like, okay, what days are we practicing? What time are we doing things? And I also sometimes think about it in a way like I get in these manic modes, especially, I do Focal MX up in Fort Collins, and that's just a manic mode all of its own. But I will think back on times where I'd be running around, and then either my mom or somebody would pass one of my kids off to me, and I'd be like breastfeeding them in the car before I played a set, because I was like, this is the only chance I get to do this. Yeah, it definitely makes you a little more crazy. And I'm not sure about what your situations are with your bandmates, but one thing that's been really helpful for me too is that most of the bands I play in, we all have kids, and so it makes it really cool. Like, we can bring them to practice at this stage with a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they can kind of all play together. And some of my bandmates' spouses or significant others will hang out and watch them. It makes it more like a family type thing. So.
No one in Spirits has kids except for me, but Leo gets to come to band practice every Sunday and hang out with like 4 other super badass women who are like his aunts and family for sure. So having that support system as my band is pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I always think of 2 images of musicians with children. One being, there's like a classic picture of Bob Marley playing acoustic with maybe Ziggy like on his shoulder, and then there's like a tour bus photo from the Allman Brothers where it's like there's just kids and like maybe they're smoking in the bus, like it's just but like it's not something about those where maybe when you were younger you're like is music not happening, or is like am I just like too square to like, can you do this, can you swing it?
Yeah.
And when I when I think of those type of images, you're like, it like you were saying, it does feel like family. You're just like, it's down home, and like my bandmates know my kids, and like Cole from Dragon Deer get some little trinkets, and like and it's like it does have like, it brings it down to earth, and it's not some sort of like cliche rock and roll thing. It's like family, like this is what we do, and like we're reproducing and we're still creating. It's good.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that I had to work at, and something that kind of came out in the first, as soon as we recorded the first episode of Procreative with Aaron Roberts of Poor Lolo, I actually ended up calling it 2 Separate Worlds, because as soon as she said that, I was like, oh my god, I'm not the only person who kind of sees it like that. And it's that, it kind of feels like you've got your like band friends, your music scene friends, people that you see, you know, walking around UMS, and then you come home and you've got like this family situation, and they don't necessarily feel like they always go together unless you kind of work at that and have the right people in your life who see you in these dual roles and don't just see you as like somebody who they drink with or party with or like rock god. You know, you also have this kind of like vulnerable side that really cares about this little human. And so yeah, I kind of would be curious to hear how you guys feel, whether those family and kind of music scene have always blended together, whether you've had to work at that.
Well, I know for me, ours just kind of happened that way. You know, when I first had my oldest, who's 6 now, like, we didn't really know any other way, so we would bring our kids to everything. Like, her first concert was when she was 2 weeks old, and her dad played in Fierce Bad Rabbit at the time, and they just released an album, and so we brought her, and she had her headphones on, and not that we meant for it to happen, but kind of sprung this, like, headphone kid foundation thing up in Fort Collins, where a lot of, like, we would start seeing more people bring their kids to concerts with their headphones, and it was just kind of fun. We'd all sit around and talk about it. But yeah, we've always just kind of incorporated them, only because we didn't really know how else not to. So and it was mostly out of necessity too. It's like either they come or we don't get to do this. So they would come with us for everything. And luckily we live in a community that was super accepting of that. And now, like you were saying too, it's like a separate world, because this year my oldest went to kindergarten. And so now it's like, oh, PTA meetings and all these things that are super over my head. And I'm like, wow, like maybe I'm doing this motherhood thing completely wrong. Like when I see these other moms that are just like, you know, super in a different kind of organization. And it's I guess, mind opening.
Similarly, Leo started touring when he was 5 weeks old. I think the first time we went on a little run, he was about a month old. And then, yeah, when he was 5.5 months old, his dad and I did a 3-month tour out of a motorhome with him as a baby. And so similar, we knew we weren't going to stop making music, and that's our passion. So at first, when we became pregnant, we thought, God, we're going to have to get a mortgage and a house and stay here in this town, and we're not going to be able to, you know, continue. And then over time, like, we kind of thawed out almost and recognized that we could incorporate Leo into our lives instead of stopping everything and becoming different people that, like, who are these other people that we think we're going to be? So yeah, he grew up on the road. By the time he was 3 years old, he'd spent something like 70% of his life on tour. And it was really hard at first because we weren't in one place, in one community with people to support us and love us who got what we were doing. We were traveling around the country in a motorhome with a baby with people who looked at us like we were fucking crazy. So, and our families too, you know, they thought we were crazy. Adventure is a lot sexier in hindsight. When it was happening, everybody thought we were nuts, but now everyone thinks it's the coolest thing ever. Like, oh, Leo got to grow up on the road. It's like, yeah, but it wasn't a lot of support at that time.
I think there's something that kids get from sort of being on the run and changing situations and not having, you know, maybe the same crib or the same bed or where your socks are. I think there's like adaptability that is in both of my kids, because we brought them all over the place, not just in rock and roll, but in, you know, road tripping and you know, here's a new bed and we're setting up your crib next to this bed and you've never been in this state, and you know, and so they seem like they roll with the punches because of that. So I always found that to be a benefit from being a bit of a gypsy.
Totally.
Yeah, for me, I actually grew up around musicians, and specifically in my family, there was a band here in town years ago called Love 45. My cousin Paul was in that band, and so when I was a young kid, I saw him grow up being this like rock star. He was like in a hair band when I was like little, so I was like, okay, like, and then I saw him parent as I was growing up, and I was like, oh, so you could be a musician and still have a family. And so I grew up with that, and he would always like sneak me into shows. That's when I met MARZ the Great when I was like 10, you know, at the Bluebird, like sneaking in. And, you know, I saw that things were possible. So when I got older, I said, well, I watched my cousin do this. Like, it's totally possible. And, you know, I'm pretty grateful to have somebody like that in my life to show me that that there is a template you can follow.
Yeah, that's super important because I definitely didn't have that. In a lot of ways, I actually felt like my parents, and in a way they kind of idolized it. Like we gave up everything to be parents, and you know, I never saw anybody be an artist or be a parent. Actually, I didn't have any really artists in my family, let alone trying to do it with kids. So and it actually wasn't till meeting people doing this show and doing these episodes that I kind of saw myself in other people, and that it was kind of a common experience. Did you guys have anybody in your life that kind of showed you the way?
I certainly didn't.
Not in my immediate family or growing up. By the time I was in college, you know, I remember some of my professors being single moms and babysitting for them, or definitely meeting like moms that I came to see what I could potentially see myself as, like a parent maybe, and a creative, you know, just artists. But no, I think it was super, because there wasn't a framework for it, you know, that's where the headstrong kind of like stubborn piece comes in, where you kind of just have to be super persevering and say, I guess I'm just going to do this. There isn't a roadmap for it. I just got to keep going.
Yeah, and again, I think if you if you didn't grow up having seeing artists create and having family, or like I knew it from pictures, you know, or like that classic like 68 picture of Grateful Dead that's all like fish-eyed and they're under a tree, and I think Courtney Love's actually in that. But there's kids all over the place and they're playing around it. That's what I hope for, and it does have those feels, you know. Like we played a Rise Festival last year, and we went all 3 days with the kids, and there was like a kid zone, you know, at the Rise Festival, and I mean, it was huge. There was like 5 different stations, and kids could come up and sing, and they had costume tents, and like this whole thing, you know, and that really lent itself to being like, I can be out in this, and we're all, there's a ton of us that are bringing our children to experience these things, and you know, going to kid and family yoga with them, like at a rock concert, but then they're like backstage, like, you know, eating my celery and carrots, you know, and it's cool. It's just like
Right. Yeah, I think that it's not immediately obvious that you can, because the things that are good for art maybe on a surface level aren't the things that are good for family aren't good for art, rather, you know, like there's this, it's kind of like, I realized in a way too, like I had this expectation from artists that I love that they were kind of like mentally unstable, or kind of like a wild card, like, you know, like Jim, you never think about like the vulnerable side of Jim Morrison,
right, or like Lou Reed with like a baby on his lap.
Right.
Like it's not you never see that.
You're like, our artists fucked up in some ways. So, you know, maybe that was the biggest reason why I thought that I couldn't continue down that path, because I thought to access songwriting that I had to have this kind of like baseline level of mental illness operating at any given point, which is like kind of fucked up to say out loud, but I like really uncovered that was true for me, that's where creativity had to come from, was like unresolved issues, and like kind of working out your inner demons in front of people, and in a lot of ways that you do, because they're never fully gone, but part of being a parent and really owning that role was learning to access creativity from different places. It doesn't mean that I'm writing about, you know, like Barney or something, but it's just digging deeper in yourself and finding new places for new parts of your personality to come out.
And you can still be twisted and feel weird and express it, and,
Right.
and have kids, you know.
I think,
Still
I think technology is interesting too these days. Like, we're able to look into so many artists' lives because of social media, and I think my preconceived thought was always that like, all my favorite artists were fucked up. You're right, and then I start to see like these posts of like some of my favorite trumpeters like out like at a theme park and shit, you know, and I'm like, oh, so I mean, I don't see that in this album here. Where's that picture? You know, and I think it actually exposes the vulnerability of us as artists and parents that like, you know, this is truly who we can be. And so I think it takes away some of that mystery or like that preconceived notion that you have to have like this chip somewhere on your soul to be able to be so good, you know. And for some of my favorite artists, some of the best parents, to be quite honest.
Compassionate. I think you also it's exciting to include them in it, you know, and see their little minds open up to it. And, you know, like I was saying before, you're filling in where you can rehearse or practice. And, you know, I'm sitting in the car and I'm running like vocal exercise things. And I'm like, ready, everyone? Like, and they're like, in the back, right? They're like going with it. And it's like, okay, that's cool. They get like excited for that kind of stuff. Or they know I'm not much of a movie watcher and they love it. My wife and the two of them love it. And I'm like in the room and I have my little travel guitar and I'm like running Dragon Deer songs behind them, you know, in headphones. And they're like, that's just what Dad does. Like, he doesn't have the focus to watch a movie, apparently. Like,
Yeah, I found myself really inspired by some of the, you know, you guys and other people who, because like you said about social media, it's kind of like a more behind the curtain look at people than you used to have with Lou Reed and Jim Morrison, or, you know, whatever artists, you know, had kids back in the day, like Paul McCartney or Bowie. You know, we didn't really have that kind of window into their lives the way we do now, and I guess now you have the choice of like, yeah, how much do you want to share about that? Because I guess you should, unless there's some kind of like safety stalker issue happening.
And I kind of had that. Like, I keep my kids off social media. They're not on, like, I never have them on Facebook. I don't have them on my public Instagram, and certainly not Dragon Deer. But then I have like a private Instagram that, you know, my friends can do it. And it was literally like back when I was in Swayback, I had, right when I got Facebook was like right when I had Jude, so this was like 10 years ago. And it just had some random guy hit me up that was like a Swayback fan, was sort of using Jude's name to me, and I was like, who are you? I was like, that creeps me out. And then I stopped.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just, for safety reasons myself, I just don't want to share that part. And the friends that know them are like, you know, have a deep relationship with them, but then I'm like pretty private about them being online. But that just feels like safe to me, you know?
Yeah, we do the same thing, private for
yeah,
family
and then it's
only.
all the goofiness, and we're
Yeah.
supping and whatever, you know, whatever the heck we do. Walk around the woods.
So I want to move to kind of one of what I think are, you know, the biggest challenges of trying to make your main living, or at least some kind of living, because, you know, we do have these financial responsibilities of, you know, school tuition, or, you know, whatever your kids are involved in, and just kind of what's been the trajectory for you as far as, you know, doubting your ability to, you know, make money and have kids and do art, and kind of where you landed now.
Well, for me, when I got out of school, my, you know, music school, my professors didn't tell me that I had the high probability of being evicted, you know, just doing music, which I did. I got evicted like right out of college in my first apartment because I thought, you know, I could just make music and get paid a living, and I found out that real quick. And so I remember my older sister was like, "You should teach music," and I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of like a get up at 1 p.m. kind of guy." And she's like, "But your friends don't get up until 1. By then you'll already be done with work, so you might as well do it." And I was like, "Yeah, good point." And so I went in. I was like, "I'm just gonna do 1 year of teaching, and then I'm done." And I'm in my 15th now, and somehow I've been able to create a balance of living this kind of like life of teaching and like in the academy, and still having the opportunities to tour and record with, honestly, like, again, so much support from my wife, who's like she's been my rock to be able to be nimble, and but I think we both kind of give each other that support. And so the nimble part is like, sometimes I have to call into work and say I'm really sick, but really I'm going on tour with like Flowbots for like a week or two, and then I come back, and sometimes it gets a little tricky, but I've made it 15 years of like being in and out of jobs, but something that nobody can take away from me is my education, and when shit gets tough, I can always like do that and recreate and just kind of have a new plan and find myself again. So but I've definitely lived the evicted life though before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know for me, like, I actually had kids much later in life. So I feel like with my touring and everything, we did that, when we were in college. We toured all the time, like, the 300 days a year type stuff. And then I'd already, still doing music full time, but I'd already started going more into the business side. But what parenthood forced me to do was like think about things like insurance and stuff like that I didn't actually think about before I had them. So, when I had my first, I was working from home, which was awesome, and because I had no idea how much daycare costs at that time. But I was without insurance, so it forced me to look at the job I was doing, which at the time was Road 34, which I love so much, but I wasn't able to get, like any kind of stability in that sense. And so it made me change jobs. So then I started working at Z2, and I was commuting to Boulder. And then I got pregnant with my second kid, which made me also think, I was like, well, I have insurance, but I'm commuting like 3 hours a day. And is this the life I want to have with my kids? And so at that point, then I took a job in Fort Collins, and it made, like, in hindsight, it's a good trajectory for me personally. And I'm still able to play music with the bands because they're all still in Fort Collins as well. And, we do more like the weekend warrior stuff, mostly because we're all older at this point and we do all have kids. But, we're still able to play music and feel really thankful for that.
Yeah. I don't think I ever thought the life that I have now was possible, especially in the early days of parenthood. I think I thought I'd always be poor and struggling. And honestly, looking back, I have no idea how I even made it through my 20s. Yeah. Like, I just really was scraping by as a musician and was totally happy to quit college multiple times to go on tour and just live that life. And just like you guys are saying, it sounds like parenthood kind of organizes, artist types to a certain degree, or kind of has the possibility, the capability of kind of like snapping us into shape. I really don't think I would have stopped my wild ways if I hadn't had Leo. And so I owe a lot to that experience. When he was a baby, we just chose to be poor, and just had part-time jobs, and we're always going back and forth in addition to shows and touring, in jobs where you're made to feel like a criminal if you ask for a day off, and you have shifts, so you got to find someone to cover your shift, and just the whole scheme of that does not lend itself toward child care, child rearing, being a parent, and really doing anything, not just being an artist, but any kind of anything. But yeah, so luckily when he started entering preschool and then got into the school years, that really kind of dovetailed with my entry back into the workforce. I did a lot of freelance work when he was young. And as he got older, I was able to take him to more things. And then he was at the age where I could take him to literally everything, meetings, board meetings, any events I had going on, he would come with me. And that was very acceptable, in our community, which is really cool. And now I feel really fortunate that I have a job that, is super happy that I have a kiddo and is very like family oriented. So he can come to work with me if he has to. And I've got like 4.5 years of that job under my belt that I've been slowly able to like rise in my career as he's gotten older and been able to do more with me. So Thanks,
Right.
Leo, wherever you're at.
I think you have a cool situation now that I've seen it. You know, the people in your work at PBS even more so think it's so cool that you have a rock band and a kid that just they think you're the shit.
Thanks. Aw. That's the thing too, is that I didn't think I could merge these worlds. I thought I had to keep weird, like rock and roll Kate separate from PBS Kate. I didn't think that would mix. I was like hiding my tattoos when I first started working there, and because I thought they were going to think that was wrong. And then eventually I started hosting this show, and the CEO of our company came up to me at an event, and she said, "I want you to show your tattoos. I want you to show who you are. You're an artist, and you're hosting an art show because you're an artist. We chose you because of the life you lead." And I was like, like that blew my mind.
Superpowers.
Yeah. Because if you don't grow up being celebrated for those things, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that being okay.
Right, you think you have to hide them and keep your identity separate. Like,
Totally.
are they gonna think I'm some weird, fuck up because I'm like I'm in a rock band with a kid and have tattoos?
So I worked graphic design for years and worked for a few different graphic design firms in Denver before I had kids, and started going freelance maybe a year before Jude came. So I was kind of working mobily, and that was working out nicely with being in bands where I was, laptop in the back of the van or just sort of working in the gaps. And had some pretty consistent clients. And then when Jude came, it was like more part-time design, and it was still doing it. I was the main caregiver for Jude, and when I would go on tour, there would be help with my wife's family or babysitters, and kind of always. Definitely have to be scheduling coverages quite a bit, but I was working as well, and it was challenging to have deadlines, but then have like biological needs to be met, So it was again working in the gaps, and then when Eve came 2 years later, I was still trying to do band, watching them do freelance, and it was like be at 5 a.m, sun coming up, and I'm laying out like an Airwalk catalog, like shaking, like or whatever, or whatever. And I was just like, I can't do that. And luckily, that sort of coincided with Dragon Deer being a bit more financially viable, so it's a balancing act, and it's still, I'm not making a killing by any means, but it's sort of, if you stick your nose in it and keep going, it seems like it makes it a little bit easier as it goes along.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like Kate, you just said, parenting is the possibility of organizing artists. If you're inclined, probably not for everybody, but at least for us sitting here, that seems to be the case. And at least for me, it forced me to kind of dig deeper in different like skill sets that I had, because I was super narrowly focused on my rock band until Jet came, and that's what I wanted to do, and it's still what I want to do. But it really forced me to think how else I could make money and spend my time in music that wasn't, playing at Syntax or the High Dive or wherever else. So, at least for me, I started getting deeper into audio engineering, and it's actually insane to think a few years ago I really didn't know that much about it, and I work at a college now in the studio. It just seems impossible, but a lot of that definitely in retrospect is related to kind of being like, it's like the universe, or just kind of listening to the ways that I'm being pushed. I don't really know what force it is, but I felt kind of like guided in that direction. And I don't know, like if I didn't have her, would I have ever moved to Denver? Would I still be like really focused on the rock band thing.
Yeah, because it's like you can squeak it out.
Yeah.
You know, when you don't have other mouths to feed, you can squeak it out, and you know, you're like, oh yeah, I'll live in your closet for $200 a month. Like, that sounds great. I don't really care. Like, if my bass fits in the back of it, like, sure, that sounds great. And then all of a sudden, it was like, you can't drive that '91 Toyota pickup truck anymore that you've had for 15 years or whatever. You need like a back seat. Like, it's like you got.
Oh my God!
You know,
yeah,
you got to adapt.
I remember that two summers ago, or no, it was the last summer. It was so hot, and Jet was back in her car seat, and I didn't have air conditioning in my car. It was a total shit show, and I was just like, dude, like, what am I doing? Like, this seems unsafe.
Mine has an 85 Toyota Tercel station wagon that I'd driven into the dirt all around the country on tour that I was not allowed to have a baby ride inside of, and was sold before Leo was even born. I was ready to drive it around.
I think, you know, it's interesting just hearing our collective responses that, you know, we've figured out a way to be nimble in our lives, to do what we love. And you know, I want to pose a question to everybody here, is like, what do you want to do with your music still as a parent? You know, because I think about how much my goal in music has changed from when I originally started. And I remember when I first got married, my wife said, like, okay, you're gonna put out this album, like, what's the goal? And I couldn't answer her. And I was like, I don't know, everybody else does that. You know, they do their CD release party, and I don't know. And she's like, okay, like, maybe we should really think through that. And that really kind of reshaped the way that I put my time into music. And so, you know, I want to ask you guys that, like, when you are creating your bands or your music, like, what are you working towards, and how do you do that with your family? Because for me, you know, I give it up to people that can be on the road 200 days out of the year, but then you're also sacrificing something on the other side. And I've always been told, like, in order to go to that next level, you have to get out of the city, which is true. But how, I mean, is that important to you guys? And so I want to ask that. I'm interested to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, like, we're starting to tour more than I ever have being a musician. And it's still not on the level that you were talking about, but it does require me to be away from the kids. And I don't know, maybe at some point it's gonna get to the point where I feel like it's a drag on me growing with them. But at this point, I'm like, I'm up in their face all day long for the majority of the year. Like, if I'm not there for 3 weeks, like, I think, and we're FaceTiming and, you know, going through it, like, I think it's okay that they, you know, that they get a little bit of a break. But to speak to your question, like, what does it mean? Things get weightier, don't they? It's got to be soulful. It can't be just like, woohoo, like, I'm playing in Sweet and getting my kicks and wearing like tight pants and getting wasted or something, right? It's like, it's like, whatever. I mean, not to diss their awesomeness, but there's definitely like we were all saying, like, this moment's better count. You better mean it. You better be full force. Like, your family's making sacrifices for you to be an artist. And, you know, if you don't execute and rip it every time, then what are you doing? Because, you know, when we're out on tour, there's times where, like, let's say last year we played 3 shows at Telluride Blues Fest. Right, and the first night we got there, we had driven from Flagstaff, played with J.J. Graham Mofra. We drove straight from Flagstaff to Telluride, and you know, the rest of the dudes were like, "I'm gonna cut loose right now," right? And it was like midnight, and we had like a show at 10 a.m. One of them was at 10 a.m. And I was like, "I sing. I'm going to bed." You know, like, I have to pick and choose. Where before it was just like, you know, I get like a thimble of tequila in me and it was over. You know, it was like all over the place. Where now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have a beer with you boys. We're gonna talk, and then you guys will get weird, and I'm gonna like steam my voice and like maybe do a FaceTime with the kids, and I'm gonna crash because otherwise I'm gonna be like hoarse and crappy and hungover tomorrow, and like I can't do that to me, to the dudes in the band, and to the family. Like override, like it has to be good, or what? Like I said, what am I doing?
So true.
Yeah, you being out there, I mean, I'm speaking to everybody, is no longer, by your own volition. You have to have support to be out there. So
true.
That has totally put it in a new perspective. Personally, I know that I'll be back out there, but it's not until it really is for something. There's like, I have very little interest in doing a dive bar tour ever again in my life.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. I think touring for so long and now, making everything count. I don't want to be out on the road away from him or I don't want to be spending any moment of my life in a non-ideal scenario, if I'm going to be totally honest. So I don't really want to, I used to love sleeping on floors and playing in dive bars for months on end or whatever, but now my expectations or I don't know what you'd call it, my bar is a little higher for the situations I want to be in, the kind of health I want for my body and myself and my well-being. And if I don't want to be a fucked up crazy artist, then I have to take care of myself.
Right. Yeah. It's not to throw shade on, because in a lot of ways you do have to go through that. It's just I feel like I've already run the gamut on the dive bar tour, and it's not really bringing anything else to my life or family.
Yeah. When it's I'm pretty good at getting drunk and partying, right? It's check, right? Let's get good at this instrument or songwriting or entertaining folks like that, that takes priority. There's a question in the audience.
The young gentleman in the black shirt.
We have Kevin with a question.
I'm not going to take credit for this term. It's Laura Goldhammer's term, but she calls that maturing.
Maturing. Ooh, that is good.
Like an aged banana. Yeah. What about you, Greta? Did you have experiences on the road?
Well, I guess with your question, my goals, I feel like because there was so much of a time when you first start your band and you're we're gonna make it, we're gonna be awesome. If you weren't doing that, you're probably not in the right profession, because every musician thinks that they're awesome and that their band is awesome at there's a possibility they might make it. But let's be realistic. I'm in a ska band with 8 people, and even if we make $1,000, that's $100 a person. So you have to put a lot of things in perspective, and we did do a huge amount of touring for a long time, and then we're maybe we're not going to make it. And, maybe what we're doing is just having a lot of fun playing music with each other, which we absolutely are. But my goal right now is that, and also being a band geek, because I'm a trumpet player, so I totally geek out on everything music. So my focus has kind of shifted. I look at it a lot as, is this worth my time? Am I having a really good time doing this? Is it something I enjoy, something I love? When I play music, the answer is always yes, because my soul needs to play music. And if I wasn't having that outlet, I think about it like people that say they work out. They're like, oh God, I got to work out every day. If I don't work out, I'm an asshole or whatever. I feel like that with music. If I'm not playing music every day, I become somebody that I'm not really and that I don't really like. So I need that. But at the same time, I've also shifted a lot too. One thing I love is local music and supporting local music. And I put a lot of my energy into a lot of volunteer work, like FOCO MX and FOCO MA, and trying to give back to my community. And before I had kids, I always thought of that as my baby. I'm I'm going to take such good care of this. And then, your time kind of shifts, but those are the things that really matter to me.
And I think there's that made me think of something where it was if when the kids came into your life, you decided I need to settle down and I need to stop creating art or stop creating the art in the way that I do, I feel like that'd be a detriment to them. I think they get excited being yo, Dad's going for it. He's kind of crazy, but he's going for it, right? and there's something excited to be guess what? You can follow through, and I'm still here for you, and I'm here for your mom, and I'm still creating and living sort of a madman. But and I think they look at that and they're I would hope that they're like, awesome, he's going for it, you know. And there's also weight behind it, like I was saying before. Like you have to succeed, you know, in whatever form that is to you, to show them, you know, that you're not just like, I'm gonna wing it, or something good happened to me, I'm gonna see if I can just like surf this for a second. Like you're like, nope, like to the next, to the next, to the next, you know.
Yeah, I think when my wife asked me that question, you know, like, what do you want to do with your music? I kind of explained to her like all these trumpeters that I really looked up to, and she's like, well, it sounds like you need to do this. And so I invested a lot of money to get myself on this record label in the UK, and that happened. And then when that happened, I was like, is that making it? Like, going back to like the making it question too, which I also I'll ask, you know, all of us, like, to define what that means. And to me, like, I was like, I'm on a record label right now with all the people that I've always loved, and I'm able to still be a dad, you know. And so but it's funny because like when I got to that level, I realized I looked up and there was still another mountain to climb, and that mountain required much more sacrifice than I think at this time I'm willing to give. And I think of some of my favorite musicians, I'm like, Wynton Marsalis has 4 kids. Like, when does he see his kids? And that's the top of that mountain. And I realized like there is that sacrifice, that if you want to reach this like global, constantly touring, like not bar touring status, that there is a level of sacrifice. And I think there's also a level to be okay with where you are, but to still like work towards something. And you know, I think that's where I'm at with it currently. And kind of going back to social media, I see like this trumpeter, his name is Kwang Vu, and I grew up loving this guy. He came to UCD and just blew my fucking mind. I was like, I want to do whatever he's doing, and we're on the same label. And I'm like, he's at an amusement park. Like, he hasn't put a record out in a couple years, and that's okay. And so it's just cool to now exist in some of this world with other people like yourselves, and to know like we could still do what we love and be good parents. So, but that's a question I want to ask you guys. Like, have you climbed up to this certain point and then seen another tier and said like, I'm gonna have to make a choice at this point?
That's like the weird thing about being in your own life, is that you're perpetually like seeking, and there's not like, it might be a plateau where you're like, cool, that last year was really awesome, but then like your only experience is yourself, and so you may not even really recognize how far you've come until a really long time has passed. For me too, I think about that in relationship to the music business and just music industry, and how it's really never done, it's never enough, you can never stop climbing. And that to me was like a perpetual dissatisfaction of all of the like label back touring and that kind of thing, was recognizing that it was incredibly exhausting because it was never enough. There was no point where they were just going to say, cool, you're done now, or you've made it.
Right.
Like,
you're the president now.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, sweet. Yeah, president.
Yeah, I want to speak to that because it's such a desire and concern after Jet was born about what making it was, and I think maybe initially flung too far in that direction and became kind of obsessed with it. Like, it was gonna validate the fact that I was trying so hard and sort of miserable at times about trying to dad and music at the same time. And until pretty recently looked at what that does to yourself and the energy that puts off to other people to have, I'm gonna call it like trying energy. It's like this thing that wants to be self-promotional all the time, and like you have to like sell yourself all the time, and just like concerned with like presentation. And so recently, even though I still, like, you know, like you say, like have mountains to climb, it's also kind of brought me recently back to just the enjoyment of playing, like you were saying, Greta. Like, I'm actually just the most happy like playing shows. Like, that's just like the baseline awesome thing about being a musician, no matter what, and recording. And there's always places to go with it, but trying all the time kind of puts off this energy that I see in other people, and then it like reflects it back to me, and I'm just like, ooh, like I guess I've been doing that.
Yeah, I think you come to, I mean, this is not even outside of parenting, but I think you just come to a point where you're like, I always describe it as like, what's the nectar? What's the like ultimate like sweet spot of like what you're going after? And if any of it has anything to do with like the weirdest business ever, then you're gonna get delusioned and freaked out. But if it's like, I need to get better at this instrument, like I need to get better at songwriting, I need to get better at being entertaining, those things are never ending, and there's no mountaintop. And if you think that you get to a spot where you're like, oh, I really did it, like on guitar, there's of course 5 million people that are way better than you know. So but I think that's exciting. It's like there is no goal. It's like, you know, dig it as it's happening.
Yeah.
And all the nuances and all the pitfalls and all the triumphs, like I don't know if you can keep it kind of even keel. I mean, I used to think like, dude, if I just play a festival, man, it's on, right? Like there's gonna be so many people there. And it's like you play a festival and they're like, yeah, nice work, next. You know, you're like, okay, that's not real, like, you know. But was that festival that you played with your friends like soulful? Did you touch the nectar like for a second? You know, like that's the goal.
Yeah. Totally. Dig it while it's happening. I think you just titled the
Dig it while it's happening. It's really all this way to get to the point where you're just like,
Yeah, and there you can get so bogged down in the admin side of the music business that it can really detract from the creation. Everything you're talking about, for me, those are my goals as well, is the actual pure joy of creation and all of the stepping stones and cool ways to get there, and just celebrating that creative being and being around other people who were speaking this other language. You know, we're not talking with words that are barely communicable and not super representative of how we're actually feeling. We're painting something together and we're sharing this other human experience, and that's my goal. Like I have no like monetary or like career goal. Like my career goal is to be happy.
same.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Which is funny to come all this way just to like figure that out, which like was basically known all along, but you kind of had to go through this like letting the ego kind of like run its course to do its thing.
Yeah, and kids make you happy, so you can do both. Like you can have that be coinciding, you know, not have it be a detriment, you know, on either end. And if dad's happy, then he's being cooler at the house, you know. And it's like when I came back from this last 3-week tour, I was like, "What's up, guys? What are we gonna do? Want to play Legos? You know, like I was like, you know, I'd been away for a second and was happy and wanted to be with them and like share that with them, you know. And I think that if you aren't allowed to create as an artist and you stifle it somehow, it's gonna trickle down to everything. Mm-hmm. And it's like if you're feeling satisfied in your life because you are on an artist's path and you have to do it, and you are fortunate enough to be able to do it, then the vibrations that come from that are gonna pass to your kids, you know.
Yeah, I think all this is just like that mindset right now. Like, I really think we're more privileged than we are, like in a situation where it's very difficult to live our lives. I think we're so lucky to have children first and foremost, and then be artists. It's like, man, this life that we have been given or fell into is like, man, not a lot of people get to do that because of all these reasons that they feel like there's either this direction or this, or maybe people can't even have kids for whatever reason. And I feel like, you know, this discussion is really around our privilege to be able to have it all. Mm-hmm. I think we're so fortunate. And I was in a band like 10 years ago, and I remember the singer told me, because I was like, dude, I think I want to get married, man. And he's like, why would you fuck your life up like that? I'm like, what are you talking about? I love this woman. And he's like, dude, okay, you fucked your life up. Like, let's see what you're gonna do with your music. And I was like, it's gonna be a big deal. And it's funny because he's not doing anything now. And he's not actually a musician anymore. And so, you know, I think sometimes even within our own community of musicians or non-musicians, they can make it seem like we're in a tough place, but I think we're ultimately always privileged, and we live in privilege like that.
Yeah, Josh got married, and all of his music's in 4/4 now.
It's all in major key.
Yeah, man. It's all major.
Yeah,
it's all
major
like what
key.
happened.
Yeah,
to that
minor,
guy.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we are about at time here, and I just want to thank you guys so much for talking to me. This is the last episode for the first ever season of Procreative and our first live event. And thank you to everybody who came out, and again to Denver Arts and Venues for helping us put this together. And we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks for having us.